Let me illustrate the nature of the military problem with a story that, true story, about a year ago, just about a year ago, I was in the Gulf, and a very senior former minister said to me, look, the way to solve the Iranian nuclear problem is you guys, you Americans, carry out the bombing and put Israeli markers on your aircraft. And the reason is, if you do it, we know the job will get done, and we always blame the Israelis anyway. Now, the politics of a military attack are much more important than the military attack itself, in my view. And the assumption that my friend made that we'll get the job done is also somewhat questionable. Do we have the assets? Absolutely. We've got the assets. Do we have the likelihood that with those assets we can pull off a strike effectively? Not so sure. Let me tell you why. Let's start with the size of Iran. This is one big country, the 18th largest in the world. The Iranians aren't stupid. They've dispersed the sites we know about. Forget about the 10 sites that they're going to build. Let's assume we were going to try to mount an attack next week, so you don't have to worry about those 10 sites. We know about a half a dozen of them, separated from one another by literally hundreds and hundreds of miles. Well, you start thinking about what kind of combat profile you're going to fly. And if you're going to fly a high-low, high profile with what, an F-18, what are you going to get out of that without tanking? Maybe 500–600 miles, which is about the distance between some of these facilities. Well, now you want a tank. Okay, you've got freedom of the skies, but you've got to take off from somewhere. Well, who in the Gulf is going to let you take off? Or will the Iraqis let you take off? The answer is probably not. So you're really talking about long-range bombers. So you go in for a strike. Now you've got to figure out whether the strike was successful. In fact, before you even figure that out, you need somebody to help you target. So who's doing the targeting for you? Are satellites doing the targeting for you? Well, they'll get the known sites. Will they get the underground sites? Not very likely. Will they get the unknown sites? Well, by definition, we don't know where they are. So you need people on the ground. Well, who on the ground is going to help you with targeting? One of the things we've heard over and over again is that the Iranians are pretty nationalistic about all that. David Albright was pointing out that one of the scientists who was killed is actually tied in with the opposition. There's no evidence that most Iranians don't want a nuclear program. Quite the contrary. So where's the targeting going to come from? And then, if you hit the sites, and you've hit all the sites, how good is your battle damage assessment? Ask the Israelis about how good theirs was in the Lebanon War. Ours isn't all that much better. So you've got issues with just the mechanics of an airstrike. Now, let's say, well, we'll bring in carriers and we'll shoot them up in the Gulf, and we've got some carriers now. Well, there's a problem with bringing in carriers, and that is that you've got to bring them from somewhere if they're not already in the Indian Ocean. Well, where are you going to bring them from? The Western Pacific? Right now? You want to mount a strike right now? When North Korea has launched the most serious crisis in East Asia in probably the last 30-plus years? Part of our problem is that we tend to compartmentalize. We think, okay, this is the Middle East. East Asia is, well, that's Pacific Command. That's not my problem. We never assume, first of all, that the bad guys are in cahoots, and we've heard over and over again that on the whole nuclear program, the North Koreans have been involved. And we never take account of the fact that there may be more than one crisis in more than one place, usually an inconvenient place at the same time. So how are we going to pull carriers in when we're just about to have a major exercise to tell the North Koreans to lay off South Korea? So it's not going to be carriers. Well, you want to fire cruise missiles? Okay, you can fire cruise missiles. But if you fire cruise missiles, again, how good is your battle damage assessment? How many shots do you take? Where are you shooting at? All open questions. I'm not saying that it is not possible. We do have the assets, and we can do it over time, which is the next problem. Time. So who's going to support this strike? Or let's put it more accurately, who will support the second round? We've gone in, we've taken out some sites. We think we've taken them out because we still have to do the battle damage assessment and be sure that it's right. But we're going to have to go in a second time. So will the United Nations support us? You got to be kidding. Forget about the Russians and the Chinese. Will the Germans, will the French and the British support us? Probably not. Don't ask for much sympathy in the Muslim world. In fact, this is one case where you could unite Muslims that have never really demonstrated before, like India's Shia Muslims. By the way, India doesn't respect the sanctions, right?
No, it does. Certainly does. Absolutely. It cooperates very closely with them. Their national regulations and sanctions are tougher than the U.S.'s.
But they're still doing some business with Iran.
Less evidence of that than American companies doing business.
Well, that's an interesting point. The other people who are open about their doing business with Iran are the Turks.
No. The Turks are open about doing business, which we have no objection to. Anybody who wants to sell the Iranians shoes, go ahead.
They're not,
Our blessing.
they've got
Our blessing.
They've got investments in southern Iran as well, and we're not very happy about that. The point is that to ask for Turkish support or Indian support is so unlikely as to be out of the question, but to expect demonstrations in the streets of those places is very likely. So to mount something like this over an extended period, to think of it somehow as Northern Watch, Southern Watch, where we could just do this endlessly, I think is fanciful.